and let's get into things with our next panel. This will be discussing the efficiency, accuracy, and scalability of AIDC in the cannabis industry. I'm excited to introduce to you all Dwayne Roebuck, Retail and IoT Channel Manager at Blue Star, Elizabeth Sinclair, Director of Marketing at Bartender by Seagull Scientific, and Dave Eagleson, Founder and CEO of Outlaw Technology. Elizabeth chairs AIM's Cannabis Work Group and is going to go into a little more detail about that to get things started. So Elizabeth, please take it away.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Mike. Apologies in advance. There were thunderstorms in Chicago last night, so my connecting plane didn't take off. Instead of delivering this webinar to you in my very quiet home office, I'm in a very noisy room at O'Hare Airport, so I appreciate your patience with me. I'm also really pleased to be sharing today's panel with Dwayne Roebuck and Dave Eagleson. These guys are two national level experts. They're thought leaders who know as much about anyone about cannabis traceability. So Dave Eagleson, please introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks for that. So my name is Dave Eagleson. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Outlaw Technology. Outlaw is designing systems specific for cannabis to do using AIDC technologies for various things: harvest, plant aspects, package aspects, and dispensaries. So my background is 20 plus years in RFID, coming out of a group called Matrix that you guys might know as Zebra at this point. So been doing this a while, and I'm excited for the discussion.
And Dwayne?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Dwayne Roebuck with Blue Star. I've been working in the cannabis industry for about six and a half years now. From our perspective, cannabis is pretty much just a sub-vertical within retail with a few nuances. And so I'm happy to be on this panel and to talk to our audience members about how they can enter and thrive in this emerging market.
And I'm Director of Marketing for Bartender Labeling, Barcode, and RFID software. I work with end users across all industries. I learn about their challenges, and I help them solve problems with AIDC technology. That's my day job. Mike, will you put up the work group slide? Oh, it is up. Okay. But I also chair AIM's Cannabis Work Group. We've been convened for about 2 years. With the goal of helping the cannabis industry. Hang on a second, I'm having a little bit of video problem here. Cannabis industry. Many of the constituents of this industry are new to traceability requirements. They believe they have to start from scratch, inventing new systems to meet new regulations. Our mandate is to help by assuring them that we've done this before, and we can apply the knowledge we've gained through our traceability work with other regulated industries, like food, pharma, and medical devices, to the cannabis industry. Dwayne and Dave are two of our work group members, and I learn something from them each time we meet. If you'd like to learn about this rapidly evolving industry, and if you want to help shape it, we'd love to have you join us. And if you're interested, please just shoot me an email. We're about to wrap up our second major project, which is a white paper defining AIDC advantages by segment. So retail, lab, greenhouse, etc. And then we also have a more generic white paper about auto ID in the cannabis industry. It's been on the AIM website for, I believe, about 6 months. Go ahead, download it, read it, get back to us and tell us what you think. So the global market slide, please, Mike. So first, many figures you'll see about the cannabis market and its economic environments don't precisely align, but trends remain consistent. In today's presentation, I'll be citing figures from the Brightfield Group, New Frontier Data, and the BDSA, which are all considered reliable sources, but whose data can show nuanced differences in places. All monetary figures here are in US dollars. So global cannabis sales for 2021 were about 30 billion, an increase of about 50% over 2020 sales. And that 2020 sales were an increase over about 48% over the previous year. So, I mean, we're looking at explosive hockey stick kind of growth here. Spending on legal cannabis worldwide will reach 56 billion by 2026. Adult use cannabis accounts for 67% of global spending. And please note, we call it adult use cannabis, not recreational cannabis, at the behest of the world's lawyers. And medical cannabis accounts for about 33%. In Europe, the market is expected to reach 4 billion by 2025, with Germany accounting for about half of Europe's sales. Israel has the world's highest rate of national cannabis use, with about 27% of its population aged 15 and above reporting consumption of high THC cannabis in the past year, followed by Jamaica at 18%, the US at about 17.5%, and Chile and Canada then rounding out the top 5, each at about 16%. In Latin America, the current estimated cannabis market is about 300 million. Mexico owns the lion's share there. Outside of the US and Canada, in the rest of the world market, Mexico generates about 32% of legal cannabis spending. In APAC, Australia's legal cannabis market is presently 95 million. It's the 5th largest market in the world. Next slide, please. The total US economic impact from marijuana sales in 2021 is expected to reach, reached, I believe, about 92 billion, up more than 30% from last year, and will reach 160 billion by 2025. That's a projection. In the US, every $1 of legal cannabis generates an additional $2.50 to the economy. So let's look at the global regulatory slide, please, Mike. The success of many US states and Canada in implementing medical-only regulations has influenced many other countries to follow suit. And similarly, legalization of adult use in Canada and approximately 40% of, I guess it's closer to 45% of US states now, created a second wave of full legalization. Several countries are in varying stages of adoption, but right now there are 8 countries where cannabis is fully legal. They're Canada, Georgia, Malta, Mexico, South Africa, Thailand, and Uruguay, besides the US. I guess that's 9, and Luxembourg. In some countries, cultivation is legal, but use is not. And in others, like the Netherlands, use is legal, but production is not. Throughout most of Europe, cannabis isn't actually legal, but has been decriminalized and enforcement is lax. And so while legalization is globally on the increase, cannabis legislation is slow to gain traction in Asia. Most countries, including the major economic markets of Japan, South Korea, and China, remain very conservative culturally in terms of cannabis usage. And the US regulatory slide. So despite what may be happening in the state where you or where I live, cannabis is actually illegal in the US. The federal government still classifies it as a Schedule I drug. But the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which was passed in 2014, prohibits the Justice Department from spending to interfere with state laws regarding cannabis. And so cannabis has been legalized, as you know, at the state level, despite its federal status. The patchwork of laws and regulations we have across the US is confusing. It hampers commerce. Federal legalization is, most think, inevitable, but perhaps slower in coming than we'd have thought. 91% of Americans say cannabis should be legal in some form. That is a resounding majority, leaving only 9% not believing so. And most approve of medical use. But progress is really slow, and it's not happening the way most expected. There are many reasons why, but one of the biggest hurdles are the national banking laws that prevent dispensaries from accepting credit cards. For now, 19 states have fully legalized cannabis, meaning adult use. 43 states provide for medical use. 12 states have laws that limit THC content, allowing for CBD products. So now that we have some market and regulatory background, let's get to the interesting part with our experts, Dwayne and Dave. Now let's talk about cannabis and AIDC. We really want today's session to be conversational, So please use the Q&A panel to ask any questions you have, and we'll answer as many as we can get to. But first, let's ask Dwayne. So Dwayne, tell us about the unique challenges we've seen for the cannabis industry that AIDC technologies are uniquely positioned to solve.
Thank you for that question, Elizabeth. And thank you for that comprehensive introduction as well. I think a lot of the challenges that the cannabis industry has, revolves around one of the points that you made, which is access to banking. Presently, right now, it's federally illegal, and so a lot of banks won't deal with them. And so they're having to look at different ways to invest. From a retail perspective, I think most of us know that it's become very hard since the pandemic to find and retain staff. And so from that perspective, RFID and AIDC are very helpful in this industry. These guys have a tremendous volume of product that's not only grown, but inventoried in retail dispensaries. And one of the challenges is, unlike most retail organizations, they can't ship their product across state lines, because at that point, it becomes a federal problem. And so it's tremendously important for them to be able to track and trace everything, not only due to state compliance and making sure that the state gets their taxes, but to also make sure that they're not growing too much or holding too much inventory, that sort of thing. And then things have to be disposed of. So AIDC and RFID help from the standpoint of not only allowing them operational efficiency in terms of track and trace of inventory, but also giving them the ability to repurpose staff in the event, so they can take them from some of the more menial tasks. Those that deploy RFID can go from multiple people inventorying upon hours, literally down to minutes.
Dave?
Yeah, I would say, to add on to that, the technology, as Dwayne pointed out, some things changed with the pandemic, right? So a lot of people had to do curbside delivery. People did delivery direct to home. It opened up a market where, you couldn't go into a storefront. You couldn't physically go in because of COVID restrictions. So it really kind of ushered in kind of a change in the market, which was, I think, interesting how quickly they were able to change. But more importantly, back to AIDC, Metric, as a lot of people know if you're in the industry, Metric is a company that is in 20 states currently, where they're deploying RFID technology as kind of a mandatory. So in the states that I'm in, the state of Maryland, for example, it is a Metric state. What that means is, if I'm a cultivator or processor, or for that matter, dispensary, more so cultivation and processing, I have to then use an RFID plant tag provided effectively from Metric / the state of Maryland, and conversely also my packages. So there's a concept you'll hear in the industry called seed to sale. The whole vision of seed to sale is the traceability of a plant from its infancy, let's say when it's very immature or just a seedling, to the point of which it now becomes something that has to be tracked. And in this world, they're tracking it each plant, so that I have to track a vegetative plant, move it into flower, move it into harvest. All of these are touch points that the states want to know. Why? They want to know there's no diversion. They want to know what product is moving through. They want to be able to check that, there's consistency in the products coming through from a testing standpoint. One of the things I think that the whole legalization statewide, not federal, but the state side, is they're testing each of these products to such a level that as a consumer, you have a much better understanding of what you're purchasing, right? I know what the contents are, not just THC. There's things called terpenes, there's cannabinoids. There's a lot of components in these products that vary, and the effect on the individual varies. So where AIDC comes in is, you can't do this seed to sale without some sort of technology to track it, right? These plants from this harvest created this product, right? To do that, you have to have visibility. And I think that's really where this technology has been rolled out. And back to Metric, when they won the state of Colorado, which was our first state to really move forward, that was the bellwether. They put RFID technology day one, and that's carrying through to a large majority of the states. Not all, but a large majority.
And one of the things Dave didn't mention is Metric, for those who aren't in the industry, it is the state reporting database to where everything has to go in. And another, key, let's face it, none of our states are doing any of this for our greater good. It's also how they track and make sure that they're compensated from a tax perspective. So I just wanted to put that out there because, we dove right into Metric and, didn't quite say exactly what it is. And Metric in this particular instance is spelled METRC.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I guess the best way to give you an analogy is Metric's the DMV of cannabis. Just like you and I have to register our cars, we have to get a license plate. I've got to tell them where the car resides. It's no different. I have to put it on a plant. I have to tell you the strain. I have to tell you where the plant resides. So it's very similar. I use that as an example because, people look at it. It is a state-run system. Metric is the host and Metric created the software side. But fundamentally, the state of Maryland has contracted, or Michigan or California. Again, there's 20 states using it. So Dwayne's correct. Metric is really kind of the way for the states to keep their finger on not only what's being grown, produced, and so forth, but let's be honest, how much tax money is going to come in at the cash register? I want to know how much is going to hit the till. So, I mean, it is kind of a dual-edged sword, but it's a necessary evil. If you want a permit, you will do this. This is not a, hey, I'd like to. This is, you will.
Yeah, and let's be clear, there are two other DMVs functioning in the US. One is called BioTrack.
Correct.
And one is called MJ Freeway. But most of the states in the US, the preponderance of the states, require tracking and compliance through Metric, METRC. So, we've talked about a little bit about this key challenge of the combination of large quantities of product with the need to track single items. We know this challenge is present in a few other industries, not totally unique to cannabis, but it's definitely a defining feature of this industry. We also have to, through Metric, we have to connect precise identifiers for harvest. Through supply chain traceability, we have to connect to these regulatory and legislative compliance systems, or DMVs. We have to connect with POS. There's consumer engagement, post-sales interaction, information. Dave, can you talk a little bit about AIDC and how it serves all those disparate needs of the industry?
Yeah, and it's pretty broad, right? I mean, you hit on a lot of points there, but the technology, and again, you're right, BioTrack uses barcode, as does MJ. So it's still a data collection situation. So in the terms of just tracking it, as you're moving through the chain, Metric is, and I'll speak to that because it's more the larger of the venues out there, or the systems out there. As they're tracking it through the system, it gets to the point where, I'm going to want to be able to do a recall, right? If I know there's a problem, Dwayne bought a product and it was tainted in some fashion, whatever it may be. The whole goal is that this seed to sale gives them that visibility to pull that product back and identify who might else have it. But you're correct. Right now, things are done more on a batch basis. So most of the systems will track a batch of products. So I've made so many vape cartridges of a certain harvest from a certain batch, but the individual side is a little bit elusive in this space, right? They're not singulating, they're not serializing. It's very similar to, I say, traditional retail. Campbell Soup has a barcode on a chicken noodle. I can scan that barcode anywhere and it's going to tell me what it is. The eaches is what's starting to become interesting. That's something where we focused at Outlaw. We've been having a lot of dispensary folks that literally their whole existence is, pulling down a physical piece of paper, going with a highlighter, counting these things. So where the AIDC comes in is these folks want to automate. As Dwayne said, labor's a tight spacing. They want more front-facing, customer experience. They don't want their back room to be that large. So back to the more I can do with automation, the more I can tie into technologies like this, the better able I'm going to be able to service the market. That last piece, as far as consumer, you can also put a QR code on these things. There's different ways to interface where now all of a sudden I buy a product, I hit it. The nice thing about the technology in the market is it also has all that traceability of the testing, as I mentioned. So I want to know what I bought. What does it consist of? So I think there's a lot of underpinnings, but again, it's still kind of coming together. I can't say it's all together.
No, Dave's entirely accurate on those points, because early on, when I started in the cannabis industry, the guys, from the grow all the way through the manufacturing and processing, they were using clipboards. It's now moved into a lot more AIDC, and some of the biggest opportunities I see in terms of RFID are happening in the cannabis industry, and it's for a variety of reasons. The operational efficiencies that they bring, when you look at, Dave spoke to it earlier, delivery. How important is it to know, when that delivery driver walks into that warehouse, exactly what you need to fulfill? The other thing too is that a lot of these states have a shelf life for the product. Even though the product can last substantially longer than the shelf life, you want to make sure that any inventory is being brought, from back to front, so that you don't have to reduce the pricing in order to get it out the door. In terms of QR codes, I'm seeing where the end users are demanding more information. People want to know how the product is grown, what type of chemicals, is it organic, is it sustainable? These are a lot of questions, that the industry wasn't prepared for early on. And so utilizing those QR codes gives them a level of engagement that they hadn't had before. With your more mature states, they move beyond, just the THC levels and CBD levels, because, anyone who's in the industry has read, I'm sure, a bunch of articles in terms of how those numbers have been, conflated and inflated. And so, Dave mentioned it earlier, they're looking at terpenes, and really, from a medical perspective, which is the vast majority of states, doctors are utilizing that in order to, figure out, what type of medication, because that's essentially what this is, to provide to these people. And, it conversely goes, all the way back to the growers in terms of what to grow. So, it's moving from a shoot from the hip perspective to targeted grows, where they're utilizing a lot more analytics than I think a lot of them, actually realize. And I think as we move into, legal federal, it being federally legal, I believe, Dave is again spot on, where, it's going to, mimic or even become like a blockchain,
Yep.
Like what some of the traditional agriculture, are utilizing, at the grocery stores. So if there's a recall on romaine lettuce, for example, you're no longer relying upon, the TV and the media getting that out. You can actually reach out directly to the consumer and tell them either to bring that product back or dispose of it.
One other thing I'll throw, Elizabeth, just real quick on that is, the other thing I think you have to understand is, because it is a controlled substance, don't lose sight of that, right? If I lose some soup in a store, I'll write it off. Here, I've got requirements that I have to inform in, the local jurisdiction. I've got to let them know. I have to assume it was stolen. I have to assume, think of it as like an Oxycontin. And I know it's maybe a bad analogy, but you have to understand it is a controlled substance. There is this track and trace because of the nature of the product. So the necessity to have it available for me, the consumer, is important, right? Because I want to know it's available when I pick it up. But more importantly, the use of the technology, we have a system we call Maverick, where we're tracking these things. And the reason I say that is if you don't track very carefully and audit very efficiently often, those missing items become, a big challenge, because legally, I, as the state, will come in and start to say, hey, Elizabeth, you're missing these 5 items. What happened? I mean, legally, they're trying to figure out, did I take them? Did an employee, was it theft in the middle of the night? There's these kind of things that add a level of complexity, a little bit beyond just, is it on the shelf?
Yeah.
For sure, shrinkage is a huge issue in many industries, but particularly here in the cannabis industry, not only because of the value and the tax implications, but there are human health implications here that our state regulatory agencies are very mindful of. So yes, it's good to know where it is at all times, and it's also important to be able to at least provide some control on shrinkage. So Dwayne, you touched a little bit on several different kinds of AIDC. You talked about RFID, you talked about QR codes, I think you talked about inline barcodes, and some of the applications, but let's talk about clear advantages of one technology over another in different stages of the supply chain. And one thing I'd also like both of you to weigh in on and talk about a little bit is, to have a truly interoperable supply chain on that golden day when we have federal regulation. And cannabis is legal across all 50 states. We're going to need to settle on some standards for the taxonomy and syntax of the data that sits in these AIDC technologies. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. From a, let's see, from an AIDC versus RFID perspective, I'm of the belief that we're going to need a hybrid system because, what happens is while a lot of the product can be tracked via RFID, some of the complexities of RFID combined with the packaging that they choose to utilize in this industry, a lot of it is Mylar packaging and, a lot of their in-demand product. One of the most, driven are the pre-roll cones, which, most of them, just dump the pre-roll cones into a big bin, they pull them out. And so, from an RFID, perspective, while, from an operationally efficiency standpoint, if you could do everything RFID, it would be tremendously beneficial. And, it would definitely help them out, from a manpower perspective. I just don't see, at this stage, how it can be done given, the product and the way most store some of the products. So I believe it's going to be a hybrid situation. The QR codes are going to be utilized, in my opinion, for more of a customer loyalty and a more in-depth engagement with the end customer. Anyone who's been to a dispensary, at least a legally licensed one, they will know that these guys, the customer service that they present in terms of, reaching out to their end users is, unmatched by a lot of traditional retailers. These guys really want to get engaged in conversations and find out, what their end users like, what they don't. They're very, eager, the bud tenders, as they're called in some locations, or cannabis consultants and others. Those guys, they utilize the product. They're very, a good one is very knowledgeable and can make some great recommendations. So the QR codes, yield a lot more in terms of customer engagement and being able to provide information on a smaller footprint. In terms of standardization of the labels, I really don't believe that that's even going to happen until we reach something where it's federally legal and things open up. And so, these guys can standardize on what's put in there, because right now, while a lot of the information is similar, it can vary greatly state to state. So I don't know that there's going to be any one standard in terms of, information that's on the label until we reach some sort of, or we get closer to federal legalization.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think you're right. It's going to be a hybrid model no matter what, right? You never want to put all your, as I say, eggs in one basket. The reality of it is if my RFID tag gets damaged and I can't read it, I need a barcode. I need a human readable. I need layering on every technology, because the reality of it, in some instances, I want to find that or scan that in an RF mode. In other instances, I have tags laying on my desk. I want to immediately go into a barcode scan because I can't isolate easily. RFID is wonderful in mass, but all of a sudden when I'm trying to do individuals, except if you you are putting it in a function like a seek and find, as we call it, which is I'm locating a specific plant tag that's put on a plant or package. But you're going to want a hybrid model. Dwayne's dead on with that. There's certain products from a price point, it doesn't warrant it. There's also just the size availability of some of these products. So you're going to want combination of say a barcode, QR code, and RF available in your bag of tricks.
And I'm seeing now where, RFID tags combined with barcode are being rolled out right from the manufacturer processor. And so what happens is the dispensary receives it already with the tags on there. If they have RF capabilities, they can utilize that. If they don't, to Dave's point, they've got the barcode on there, they can, utilize that. And Dave brought up another, really good point, which is, most of the locations, and matter of fact, all that I've been to, I've not been to one, a dispensary that didn't have their own set of printers for the very reason that Dave brought up. If something's damaged in transit, they're able to quickly relabel that. They don't want to do it, long term. And I think, in some of the states, they may have like 40, 50 different printers back there and they're labeling right at the dispensary. But I think as the industry matures, we're going to continue to see it come, directly to the dispensaries already pre-labeled. And then, that provides a layer of operational efficiency right there on its own.
Yeah, and I think the three of us see when we're out there talking to the cannabis industry is that RFID's ability to do large scale, non-line of sight inventory and locationing is eye-opening to some of the smaller players in this. Everyone's a little scared of it because it seems like it's new technology. It isn't new technology, but when companies can appreciate the kind of efficiencies that they'll gain, it's really an eye-opening experience. Another thing about RFID is, cultivating cannabis can be a dirty operation. You get, I think Dave Eagleson was talking about the dirt and grime that covers up the barcodes that can render them unreadable. And RFID really helps in that environment.
The other thing I'd say, and I'll just jump onto that point, you're right, it's mass read, but the other thing is the ability to, we have a device called, we call Desperado, that has a seek and find. So seek and find, if you don't know, is loading a tag, an RFID tag in, and based on the signal strength, I'm going to be able to walk you to it. That becomes something really critical because now I'm trying to find a specific plant, a specific package.
Well,
And I'm sorry, Dwayne, go ahead, please.
And even from a grow perspective, because, I've talked to growers who utilize it because they want to know, they may even have employee badges that are RFID enabled as well, so that they can tell which employee moved the plants, if they had to another room, at what time, and, things of that nature, so that they know everything that's going on. Because this plant, one of the things I learned was it interacts with our body's pH. And so at certain stages of the growth, you want to be really careful in terms of moving it and, making any changes to the environment unless absolutely necessary. And the other thing too is, it's not unlike any other industry where, some of these plants evolve and they grow legs and arms and they walk right out of the back door, so it's a way of, keeping up with that, because a lot of the black market is fueled, by those instances. And, the thing is as a grower, a processor, or a retail dispensary owner, when those fines are levied against you, they are pretty significant, and you only get a certain number of them, before you lose your license. And it's no small investment in terms of getting these licenses in some states.
Yeah, it's critical, right? They need to be able to isolate and find something in a sea of plants. If you can envision, I've got 10,000 plants in a given room, go find me this one, good luck. You're going to have some sort of technology like RFID to be able to hone in on it. Examples, a lot of the lab folks, they're going to want to test that plant. How's it coming? How's it going? So, it's almost like they're trying to keep an eye on the crop, if you want to call it that. So it's interesting where the technology lends itself is, I've got a client that can take 4,500 plants and they're able to inventory the room in 12 minutes, right? You can't do that with a barcode scanner. You're sitting on a stool and the plants are so dense in terms of reaching them. You couldn't, I mean, not easily.
Yeah, and we all know that chain of custody has huge implications to this industry. And Dwayne, the idea that employee badges are RFID enabled, that blows my mind. That adds a whole new wrinkle, and really allows for really precise chain of custody down to the individual level at the production facility.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, I was just going to say we've had one question come in, and again, we really want this to be more of a conversational discussion. We'd love for the audience to get more involved. We want to answer your questions. We want to know what you want to know. We know what we think you want to know. The first question here is, where do we predict to see the largest adoption of AIDC technology throughout the cannabis business? In the cultivation or grow operations, the labs or converters, meaning the infused and product side, or the retail side throughout the dispensaries? Who wants that one?
I can start it.
You got to start and I'll jump in.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's not going to be, individually verticalized as we think of it today, because initially in this industry, you had to choose a vertical, whether you wanted to be in grow, processor manufacturing, or retail dispensary. Now I'm seeing a convergence through mergers and acquisitions and things like that, where organizations are truly becoming seed to sale. So I wouldn't look at it individually. I believe, what's going to happen is it's going to be a standard across the entire seed to sale ecosphere, if you want to say. If you're looking in terms of the biggest bang for the buck, I think that's, probably going to be the retail dispensary, because they're going to be, moving the most product. That's where it goes out the door. Imagine, like a Walgreens or a CVS, where the inventory is changing over every 45 to 60 days. So there's a tremendous opportunity, not only in terms of AIDC technology, but also in terms of media, and selling the labels and things like that. It's one thing to sell, like the barcode scanners or the RFID readers. It's a whole nother thing to, get one of these guys under a 2 or 3 year contract in terms of media. That's money while you sleep right there.
Yeah, I'd say, I think it's an all. So instead of, it's not just cultivation has a value prop based on plant tracking, harvesting and so forth. You've got each one has its own needs, right? Those needs are addressed by the technology itself. Dwayne's right that, the dispensary has the big flow, the products, the touching of the customer. Do I have it in stock? So, I think that's probably the biggest somewhat bang for the buck. The reality of it, though, is it comes down to solutions, right? You're not just going to, I've had clients, again, we at Outlaw, we create full systems. So we've had clients say, hey, I bought a handheld. Now what do I do with it? I'm like, good luck. You need a solution. You need software. You need to be able to integrate back to these systems. So part of what we focused on is the interaction. How do I make this tool intuitive, easy, the SOP of it, how do I use it day in and day out? I need to train the new guy in 5 minutes. How do I do that? So we've put a lot of time and effort into that kind of study, and I think others are looking at it, but it really comes down to, lack of better terms, software. It's wonderful. Metric puts out these tags, but now someone has to read them. So that's kind of where we focused on is, okay, now that they're on the plants and they're on the packages, someone's got to make value from it. And that's kind of what I focused on, or our team is focusing on. But just, I worry that people are just going to go out and arbitrarily just buy a bunch of hardware and say, now what do I do? Well, you just have hardware. It's like having a laptop without an operating system. You just have a laptop. There's no Word or Excel. You got to get the app. So just keep that in mind. I just think some people assume that they're just going to open up shop and sell hardware to the industry. You're not. In this industry, because pricing's been a lot of pressure, you saw big numbers of billions and billions of dollars. I saw a quote, 37% of the cultivator or groups in California are losing money. And you would think, how can that be? Well, I'm telling you, there's the taxation in this market is high. The demand is such that, they're doubling and tripling capacities, but the demand's only going up 10 and 15%. We'll do the math. The only thing that affected is I've got double the amount of product with the same amount of customers. You're going to cut price. So this is an industry that's going through a lot of changes, and it's state by state, just to be honest. But, I think the gold rush mindset of these people have more money, they know what to do with. They don't.
No, they
don't.
And then one of the challenges that they have, it goes back to banking, because they can't get banking like a traditional retail business would. So, I've talked to guys who tell me that just to have a banking account, you're looking at 14, 16% interest. The rest of us would scoff at something like that. And so because it's so highly cash regulated, even a reseller. I've had resellers who sold $20,000, $30,000 worth of printers to cannabis companies, and then when they send out the invoice, the guy shows up with $20,000, $30,000 worth of cash, and they're not prepared to take that. So some of our resellers have purchased cash counting machines and things like that. When you get into this industry, especially at this stage now, you have to be aware of some of the nuances and some of the challenges that they will have. Now, this is still in a very fledgling state, and I believe that a lot of the issues that they have will go away when it's federally legal. And, now you can grow, if you've got, as the industry is now, if I've got a bunch of any particular strain, I have to, I can only sell it in that state. Imagine what happens when you can start pushing it across all 50 states, when they can bank like we do and they have access to loans and capital the way traditional retailers do. So, there are going to be several iterations of this industry. So I always tell resellers that are looking to get into this, you have to be able to embrace the change, because, what I've seen is the only thing that doesn't change is change.
Well, and I'll throw one more piece before you jump in, Elizabeth. One more thing to keep in mind is the banking extends down to what's called tier 2. So vendors like myself, right? They're going to look at me. I mean, I've had partners of mine that do like infrastructure, cameras, and technology lose banking because they went on a website and saw that they did cannabis or had cannabis related businesses. So this thing is not just, if you think it's just the cultivator or the dispensary, it's not. It can carry down. I've seen people basically have banks going, hey, we did a review and guess what? We're dropping you. And they're doing things that aren't growing of product or selling of product. So it does extend out. Now I'm saying it's more the exception, but it does exist. This industry still is going through kind of that balance of state legalization with federal illegalization is tricky.
Yeah, and interesting, going back a little bit, Dave, you brought up the gold rush mentality. There's such a glut of product. I think Oregon is particularly been impacted by that. It's a tremendous issue. And what we're seeing is consolidators, corporate consolidators coming in and buying in product. What was really interesting to me about what's happening in Oregon, I at least have always assumed it would be the tobacco companies and the giant beverage conglomerates like AB and Bev that we would be the ones moving in to consolidate and buy up the product. Interesting enough, the largest consolidator in Oregon right now is Pfizer. So there are all kinds of large industries looking to get involved. And what that brings to mind to me, Dave, I've heard you say that efforts by groups like Walmart, Boeing, Johnson & Johnson, others can be carried over to cannabis, although they might be shocked at the thought. Corporate America, I believe they want to make some money off of this product, but they're not quite sure how to navigate it until we have federal legalization. So how can we translate work done by these big corporate entities that everyone in America knows and loves? How can we translate that work for unique data requirements to the cannabis industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it, I mean, especially what we're really tracking is the tag, right? In an RFID world, I'm not tracking a plant. It's what I told it it's attached to. It happens to be a plant. It could be a box from a Walmart distribution center. So the technology in terms of just, the readability and how it works and the functional side of things, and even the data, the management side of things is very similar. So the learnings of, say, a Walmart going from case level to item level, well, they've justified the fact that there's an ROI, that there's value in doing this. And especially in today's world when it's just in time, literally just in time. I want to order it and have it by the end of the day. Well, when that starts to become the norm, you better have the visibility. So back to cannabis, you're going to want to know that if I'm across town and I put an order in and I say, hold this, I'm driving now, it better be there when I show up or I'm going to be really upset. And then most people are in the same mindset. We've kind of indoctrinated our customers to expect the Amazon Prime mode, which is, I ordered it, it's going to show up any minute. So in that mindset, if you don't start carrying through the technologies, you are not going to survive doing this in a manual basis. You're not going to be able to, hey, Steve, where did you put that box again? And, I don't know, he's at lunch. So now I can't find it. I'm just saying the technology that people are kind of adopting and honing in and figuring out in traditional worlds, whether it's the J&Js, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Boeings, carries through, right? I always say to people, I'm actually tracking the tag, not the item. It just happens to be on something. So, those kind of learnings can carry through pretty cleanly. And again, they've got ERP systems. We're starting to see where some of these groups are rolling out the SAPs of the world, the NetSuites. So the industry is trying to figure out how can I create an overlying, just not these little disparate state by state kind of like one-offs, but how do I put it all together? And there's companies like LeafLogic, Dutchy, as they call it, that has got systems for that. There's people that are playing in this space that are seeing that, well, what's done over here in traditional retail can carry over. Now, I caveat, there's nuances to this market. Don't think because you're doing 7-Eleven, you can do a dispensary. There are different models, the way the data flows, the update. You're not having to update the state of Maryland on the fact that I just sold a can of 7-Up at the 7-Eleven. You're not, but I'm saying in the cannabis you are. So there is some nuances. I don't want people to think that it's identical, but again, there's a lot of parallels.
Yeah, and to Dave's point, one of the things I always do is I pay attention to the press releases when they bring new executives on and some of these cannabis software companies. And early on, 6 years ago, it was unheard of for a retail executive to leave traditional retail and go into cannabis. Not so much anymore. You're seeing more and more where that's happening. And what they do when they do that is they bring along, to Dave's point again, some of the knowledge and the successes that they've had, and they start to demand a higher level of analytics. One of the companies that I've been reading that's very interested in getting into the cannabis space, especially if I believe what I'm reading, but I do in this particular instance, it is Amazon. We talk about that, and Amazon's been looking to get into medical.
Looking to get into everything.
Right, and to Dave's point, they will have the ability, they have the supply chain to tell you it'll be there in 4 hours, that sort of thing. And I've been reading for years where pharmaceutical companies are buying up huge swaths of land in Northern California and Oregon specifically for that, because they realize there's a negative connotation around the opiates. And so, they're moving right into this. And I've had resellers who told me, resellers that deal with big tobacco is waiting to come in, to this as well. If you can grind up and put tobacco into a cigarette, what prevents you from doing that with cannabis? And so, I think, I look at the industry as evolving into somewhat of the beer industry, where you're going to have, at some point, we're going to have your Miller, Coors, Budweiser, Coronas, which are the big brands. But at the same time, there's going to be a very viable market for, for the craft beers or craft cannabis, so to speak. And then you've got the alcohol companies that are now coming in, because in a lot of the states, alcohol use has diminished as cannabis use has increased. And so, now you're seeing cannabis infused alcoholic beverages and things like that. So, that's why I say this industry is going to go through a bunch of different changes. And, I think the people who have an open mind and can, speak to the technology and especially the operational efficiencies that they bring, because while I would like everything to go RFID, it's just not going to happen, especially at this time, because, one of the reasons why they're fearful of RFID is it's not an exact science. I've actually had CIOs of cannabis companies tell me, if Walmart couldn't figure it out, why should I look at it? And, the news now is Walmart has figured it out.
Yep.
There's a mandate.
They figured it out.
For Walmart. Yeah. And so, all that's going to do is, because for the 8.5 years I've been at Blue Star, it's always been, this is the year for RFID. This has been the year for RFID, but we're finally at a point where it really makes sense. The prices are coming down. The challenge is, like anything else right now, supply chain. Once we get through that, I think we're going to see this industry really flourish.
Well, it's funny you say that, because barcoding took 30, 40 years to really become perpetuated to the level it is, right? I mean, everyone assumes that things happen like this. So RFID, if you really go back historically, back when I was at Matrix, it was proprietary. We really didn't have standards till like 2004-5 timeframe. So, I mean, we're only 15 years, 15 plus.